We've had a number of questions in about the war in Iraq. There's a number of questions. Can you just very succinctly give us a quick question that I can put to all members of the panel? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Graham Halls. What conditions should exist before we decide to overthrow a dictator of another country? We might want to compare Iraq with Zimbabwe or North Korea. Why should we do it, and what might the reasons be for doing it?
So what conditions should exist before we decide to overthrow a dictator of another country? What do you think of any particular dictator of any particular country? Yeah.
Whoa, it's a tough one, that.
Okay. Can we have the microphone back on the gentleman, please? Yeah.
Good choice.
The overthrow of Saddam clearly created a lot of different opinions.
Okay.
But I mean, I think that, but we haven't done it, say, with Kim Jong-il in North Korea, or Mugabe.
So are you saying that Western policy has not been consistent?
I think that's probably what I'm saying. And
okay.
But in other words, what would the conditions be? And if we haven't done it in some place, why haven't we done it when the conditions were right?
Okay, we get the drift of it. Canon Williams, please. Can you kick us off on that one?
Right. I think, first of all, there must be some enormous injustice that has been perpetrated in that country, which is recognised. Secondly, I think there must be some agreement, and this is a very, very complex area, within the corridors of power of the nations of the world, in other words, the United Nations, that action needs to be taken. And thirdly, there must be some likelihood of a successful outcome to taking action. I think all of those, well, it's easy enough to see the enormous injustice. It's extraordinarily difficult to get agreement, and it's extraordinarily difficult to establish that there's going to be an outcome which isn't better than the suffering that might be caused by taking action.
So are you saying, Dr. Williams, that at the time of the Iraqi invasion, that you supported the Allies' action at that time?
Upon
the information you had.
yes, on the information that we had from high authorities of intelligence and so on, there did seem to be an argument. I think and the debate goes on and on about this, where it doesn't really totally satisfy the second condition, that there was agreement from the United Nations. Now, there is an ongoing argument about that, and historians will argue about it forever and ever. But the case certainly isn't proven.
Okay. Air Marshal.
Well, very briefly, I mean, you have to have legal justification, and that's through the United Nations, commonly accepted, with warts and all, of course, because it's not a perfect institution, as we know. But the other thing is you have to have the moral justification, because you have to explain to the troops and their families and the country why you're doing it. Now, of course, that's based on the information you have at the time. If that subsequently proves to be erroneous, then of course you have to deal with that accordingly.
You were serving at the time of the invasion of Iraq?
Yes.
Did that cause you any problems at the time? Were you?
At the time, the information indicated that the United Nations view was probably correct.
And you had no problem with that subsequently?
Well, no, at the time, people acted on the information they had at the time.
Okay. Sir John.
I wasn't serving at the time, but I did support the invasion of Iraq, and I did it on the basis of the justification, the UN justification. But I made a big assumption which turned out to be wrong. I assumed that the follow-on actions, the what-ifs, had been thought through. And I was extremely disillusioned and disappointed to find that they hadn't been thought through. So what did you do with the opposing Iraq army after you had invaded and defeated them? What do you do with the police force? What do you do with the prisoners in the jail? What do you do with the animals in the zoo? What do you do with the artifacts in the museums? All these what-ifs, what do we do next? I assumed had been thought through. And to my absolute amazement, they hadn't been thought through because of the haste to get there and do the business without any thought of the consequences thereafter.
Okay. You've heard three of the answers.
Three words. Three words.
Three words, yes? Yeah.
Actually, 4 words.
4 words.
5 words.
You've got 6.
All right. National interest.
3.
Nobody's saying that. The other is, can we do it? Capability. There's no point in having all the moral arguments if we don't actually have the capability to do it. My final words is that on those two bases, let's invade Brussels tomorrow.
Okay, we're going to come on to that next. Gentleman asked a question. Can we get a microphone back to the gentleman who asked the question? And while we're doing so, sir, can I ask you what your opinion is of the opinions that you've just heard?
Well, I understand it's difficult for some people to perhaps put their neck on the line and say what they think. But I think that, you know, in the end, we've got to believe that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think I'd be interested to hear from the Canon, you know, in terms of the Christian aspects. I know you mentioned the thing about, you know, what the church's job is, but I'd be interested to know what in terms of morality, what you feel the Christian church has to say on this. But that's the second question, which I'm sorry about.
No.
It's not the right thing to do, because that's a value judgment. It's a question of whether it's legally, are you entitled legally to do it? And that's what drives the military, not whether it's right or nice or good to have.
Who makes the laws?
The Attorney General advises the Chiefs of Staff on the law.
So was the invasion of Iraq
Well,
illegal or questionable?
he said, having changed his mind, as I understand, that he came up in the end and said it was legal. But 3 days before, he said it wasn't legal.
Are there any lawyers in the House? I've asked this before. Any offers from any lawyers on this one?
Well, why are you asking for lawyers? Do you need an urgent interim injunction?
No, there's a matter of opinions flying around, and we've got cameras here, you never know, do you?
I'd like to put General Willsey on the spot, if I may.
Please do.
The government of the United Kingdom divided the island of Ireland in two in the first part of the 20th century. So wasn't it perfectly fair for the Serbians to decide to divide Bosnia in two so that they could have their bit as well?
Yes, but that was the United Nations took over in Bosnia and decided what we should do, and it was the United Nations mandate that caused us to go in there.
Shouldn't the United Nations, if it existed at the time, have had a similar mandate to stop the British dividing the island of Ireland back in the 1920s? Is there really a moral distinction?
Well, I'm not talking about the morality, I'm talking about the legality, and the morality must be left out of it, because as a soldier, you can only act on the legality. Is it legal for me to deploy and to open fire and to do the things that I'm required to do? The legality is the key thing, and you turn to lawyers for your legality, and you turn to the Attorney General in the case of the government senior law officer.
You mentioned about the moral question. Canon, do you want to come in on the moral issue of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly the points that have been made. First of all, there has to be a demonstration that this is a lawful action. Now, this is complex to establish. There has to be a demonstration that this is going to bring, that is highly likely to bring a better situation about than the one that pertains at the moment. And there has to be some, and that involves some considerable planning about the future. And it's not just the war. It's not the war. It's not the soldiers going in. That is important, but it is the peace which has to be planned at the same time. Now, as has already been said, that was the huge failure in Iraq, that the military venture went very well, and for some extraordinary reason, the after-planning seems to have been largely absent, or certainly not planned in the degree that was required.